Come in and get cozy with me live on Spotify this week as I initiate soulful conversations and engage dialogue to reflect your most elevated state. May you ponder these topics with depth and gravity as we dive into our true nature beyond the endless distractions. We are all worth so much more than the naked eye can perceive. And we're live. So if you are listening on Spotify at this moment, you can actually go to the app and see that for this week's episode, I have uploaded a video feed of me talking directly to you on the camera. So, even though this is a different experience, I'm going to try to streamline it as much as possible and keep to the segments as originally planned. So, general check-in for this week is that I have had quite an interesting experience that really helped me contextualize just where I am emotionally these days. I'm fresh into my 30s. I turned 30 last October. So, gosh, what is it? 3 months and I'll be 31. That's crazy. 30 has flown by. But anyhow, being in my 30s, certain aspects of my life have become more pronounced. So I'm more aware, more acutely aware that I am a single woman and that I don't have children, and that my 30s, even though I do not believe in timelines over, life happens in divine timing. I'm definitely a proponent and believer of that. There is biological consideration that goes into the feasibility of different stages of my life kind of happening in a sequential order, in a biological order that makes sense to me. So I'm just more acutely aware that, like, I'm a single woman, I don't have any children, and I'm wondering sort of like, is this the era of change, or, which is equally as valid in my opinion, am I going to stay on this path and continue to build my life in this capacity in a way that is meaningful to me and for me solely? So I had a friend who travels for work, and that friend also has their daughter during the summers, and they brought their daughter to Charleston. So I got some time to hang out with just the daughter because I have more flexibility to be able to, work from home, and I didn't want my friend's daughter to just sort of hang out in a hotel while they were working all day. So we hung out and we did things, and we kind of pivoted around my work schedule as much as possible so that I could show this little girl my city and help her to have a great summer. And we had a lot of fun. Like, it was a great bonding experience. And I remember it was my friend, myself, and his daughter, and we were sitting on the couch, and they had gotten off of work, and I remember just kind of observing the situation, taking it in, and feeling like this was the experience that I was looking for when I got my cats. This was the feeling. This was the feeling that I wanted to usher into my life. This feeling of community. It was a small community in those few moments, right? It wasn't, anything that lasted long. And it was completely platonic. But this was absolutely the feeling. And it just kind of brought me to a place where, again, I started thinking my 30-year-old feeling, their thoughts, and wondering, like, okay, is this feeling going to be a reality for me? I believe that it will. I oscillate between that is my desire and I really love my freedom as of now in the way that my life is orchestrated. So I'm not sure. And that's why, again, I rely on divine timing, because I know that if there's even an inkling of desire, that's generally a sign from the universe that it's in store for you and it's coming, it's on its way, or else you just wouldn't want it. And so I think that any feelings of resistance may just come from trying to brace myself for possible disappointment, like a lack of faith that the things that I truly desire are mine, which is true, they are mine. So That's my general check-in. I'm just kind of feeling the feels after that experience. It was a wonderful experience, and I want to reframe that experience as a foreshadowing to all of the joy that is to come when I do have community and a little family of my own. Okay, so let's move on to this week's tarot pull. So, because I'm live, you can actually watch me do this on Spotify Live. So, I'm going to actually shuffle the deck and pull a card and read from the book on video. So again, for this Divine Feminine series, I am using Abiola Abrams' African Goddess Rising Oracle deck. This is a beautiful deck. I would absolutely recommend it. It doesn't come with a book, but she also sells separately a whole textbook called African Goddess Initiation, which goes into depth of all of the cards in this beautiful, beautiful deck. So actually, because this card, I was going to shuffle on deck, but what I noticed is that sometimes when I am reading for myself and I pull out my deck and I'm getting ready to shuffle the cards, I may flip the cards on accident while I'm trying to get them situated in my hands, and a card will catch my eye that lets me know intuitively that's the card I should have. So that's what happened this time. There's no need for me to shuffle. Number 41 jumped out at me. So this is called Nkokazana. Nkokazana. This is a beautiful card for those who are not able to watch me on Instagram and see this beautiful card. I'll describe it to you. There's a woman and she is it seems like she's in a heavenly space. She's on top of the cloud. She has this beautiful rainbow dress. Her arms are spread out, and there's also, is this a lamb? It looks like a lamb. I'm not really like a zoo animal specialist or a farm animal specialist, but it looks like a lamb to me. There's a plant as well, and I believe this is the sun. She's holding the sun in her hand as well as a plant. So again, Nkokazana, number 41. So let's pop open the tarot deck and see what this card has in store for us today. All right, so Nkokazana is the goddess of celestial alignment. Her origins are from Zulu or South Africa. The temple is the high priestesses and the element is water. Nkokazana is the healer of healers and the teacher of teachers, whose love for humanity makes the corn grow. She dwells in foamy waters, but is known as the heavenly princess. As above, so below is celestial alignment. Guidance. Your natural path is to be in alignment with your own divinity. No one can take from you what they didn't give you. Embodiment. How do you want to feel? You think often about what you want, but goddess energy speaks to us in feelings. Celestial alignment is being in sync with the energetic feeling, the frequency of the sacred. Everything that you desire is in that frequency. Match it with your feelings. That is the energy of goddess. Goddess declaration. I am always being guided in the right direction. I hope that spoke to you this week, the energy of celestial alignment, and hopefully the discussion that we'll have this week on Lyvonne Briggs will help you to determine what changes you need to make in your life to make sure that you are in alignment with yourself, your home of yourself. So as I mentioned, we are going to look at a few clips from author and spiritual leader Lyvonne Briggs. I wanted to go ahead and read out her bio so you have more context of all of her wonderful achievements. So Lyvonne Briggs is a master in divinity and a theological master, THM, I guess that's what that means. Ooh, yikes, I hope I didn't butcher that. An Emmy Award winner and a body and sex positive womanist preacher, speaker, coach, and creator. Briggs is the host of the Sensual Faith podcast and the founder of Beautiful Scars, a healing-centered storytelling agency focusing on fostering pleasure and resiliency. visionary of the Proverbial Experience and curator of Sensual Faith Sunday, a series of virtual spiritual gatherings to nourish your soul. She's been featured in Essence, Cosmopolitan, Rolling Stone, and The Washington Post, and Sojourners named her one of 11 women shaping the church. A New York City native and proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, Lyvonne Briggs is currently based in, this is a little outdated, it says New Orleans, but I've been on her Instagram, so I know that she's currently in DC now. So, I want to get into a few clips of an interview that she actually did with a gentleman named Donnell Wrights. He has his own YouTube page. This is where I source those videos. I will absolutely post the full video in the description for this episode so you can check out the full interview. But there were 3 particular clips that I wanted to talk about in the context of divine feminine sensuality. So we've had a lot of conversation about what divine femininity means to the first 2 guests that I interviewed for this series on divine femininity, Shannon Corprew and Asia May. This week, I want to use material from a woman who speaks candidly on this topic, especially as it pertains to some of the confines and limitations placed on divine femininity from the perspective of more of like a Christian-based theology. Now, Lyvonne by no means is someone who is strictly speaking from that perspective. I think that if she was, it would be very hard for me to interact with that content because, as you know by now from former episodes, Christianity no longer resonates with me. But some of the things that she says, most of the things that she says, I should say, absolutely are very insightful and I think add a lot of value to this conversation of the divine feminine from a sensual perspective. So I'm going to start with clip 1 and then I'll give my feedback and I'll just roll through the other 2 and have a conversation on the general topic that way this week.
Here's the thing. So the Sensual Faith is written for Black women 18 to 45 currently or formerly churched. And even if you don't consider yourself a religious person, chances are some type of puritanical ideals have shaped your life's formation and your social norms and conditioning and things like that. And so for me, I'm honoring the fact that people are having sex. Black women and femmes, Black men, folks, Black Christians, what we're having sex, we're just not talking about it. And that's really, really dangerous because I'm a body and sex positive pastor because in order to talk about sex, we have to be talking about bodies. And in order to talk about bodies, we have to remove stigma and shame around it. So even just saying the anatomically correct names for body parts, right? That I am talking about changing a culture so that we can even get to the sex. Sex is great, sex is good, but we have some baby steps before we can even get there.
There's a lot of layers that we have to go through before we can even get to the
it's
bigger
a
topic.
Fluffy biscuit, honey, and it's just layer after layer after layer.
It's crazy, and you peel it back so well. Like you talk about everything from like just our discomfort around menstruation, for example, that being just a common thing that every woman that we know experiences.
If you have
typically.
A healthy functioning system,
yeah,
every 25 days.
Yeah. So, but we kind of create this this culture of disgust around it, where it's like we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to touch it, we don't want to hear it. Keep it over there. We don't want to hear about your attitude changing because of it. And it's little stuff like that you really peel back throughout the book, and that get us to really see how this is not only, it's not about just the preacher going up there and talking, saying things. It's about a culture of normalization, and a culture that is patriarchal, a culture that does not like women or doesn't want women to be heard or seen, or doesn't want to talk about the experiences of women.
Right. It's such a natural, magical, mystical process by which none of us would be here if it didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
Like that's literally how you came to Earth. And so for me, I'm like, if men menstruated, we would give a shit about cycles and sanitary napkins and things that we need.
And we
you
know that.
know?
It's very,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, it's really important that we see the ways that our culture has tried to shame and minimize women's bodies, women's and femmes bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because many of us were raised in patriarchal churches, because we have typically male centric language when we're talking about the divine, the image of the divine feminine, the idea that a woman or femme's body can be holy,
Mm-hmm.
that is new for some people. And so if you don't see me as bearing the imago Dei, if you don't see me as an expression of God, if you see me as cattle, if you see me as childbearer, if you
Yeah.
see me as pleasure center for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're erasing my humanity. And if you erase my humanity, you're trying to diminish my divinity. And that's what I'm really expanding in the text, is that our humanity is divine. Our
Yeah.
divinity is enfleshed. You can't
Yes.
separate the two.
Okay, so Lyvonne talks a lot about feminine sensuality as disgusting in this clip. That's one of the themes that really stuck out to me is she talked about this idea of our menstruation and our cycles being something that elicits a lot of shame and something that we should hide. And one of the things that I thought about with this whole idea of sensuality being framed through disgust, because in this sense, I am definitely pairing like menstruation as a process that happens from our sexual organ, a process that is part of the reproductive cycle, and so therefore encompassed in our sensuality. And the disgust there sort of transfers into these ideas that we have about the untouchable whore, the idea that a woman who is embodied in her sensuality, in her sexuality in some way, whether that be through her embodiment in her natural processes of menstruation or her decision to have agency over her body through performance of sexuality in a particular way, thus becomes subject to these sort of implications about her character and who she is. The idea of shame as well that she talks about, Lyvonne, when she says that the feminine body is seen as like a bearer of children, of cattle, or as cattle rather, as just a pleasure center. It's almost as if we are shame bearers by nature, right? The female body, feminine sensuality is framed through this idea of being a bearer of shame that needs some kind of external validation. Generally, from a patriarchal perspective, the validation does come from men to affirm how and when we can be sensual. We are not allowed to have that level of sensuality if it comes from our own decision to be that way. It's only when we are serving others, right? Our body is seen as that pleasure center that Lyvonne mentions. And so I found that really interesting because, again, like this pairing of disgust is something that is very relevant to me. If you scroll back about 2 episodes, no, 3 episodes now. I think it's about 3 episodes. The Let's Get Physical one. I talked about the amount of shame that I had when I when it comes to stepping into my sensuality and the road that I had to, the journey I had to go down to really undo a lot of that messaging of shame that has been placed upon me. The other thing I'll mention about this clip that stood out was her talk about the language of sensuality and how, again, like as I mentioned through my own journey, sensuality is a process that begins in childhood and it matures into our adulthood. And so if we're starting from a place where we cannot use the language of sex, right? We cannot talk about our body parts without masking them behind these politically correct terms and innuendos like pee-pee or coochie or whatever you want to say. Even I'm laughing about it, right? Because it's so ridiculous in essence. Like, no, it's a penis, it's a vagina. Like, these are actual anatomical terms. There's nothing embedded in that. It's completely neutral, just like my elbow is neutral and my kneecaps are neutral. But yes, if we cannot do that, which we struggle, at least, again, speaking from an American context, of course, that's going to build upon itself, right? Like, we're stunted early on in childhood, and that shame just kind of grows, and it's systemic, and it's something that is intentional to, as Lyvonne talks about candidly in her book and in this interview, sustain the systems that exist.
So, like, again, this is theology that's telling you to die to your body. You can't die to having a body.
Right.
That's not, you know.
You can't. And that's the thing, right, Donnell, is that particularly when it comes to things like purity culture and like true love waits and pinky promise and all that tomfoolery, you are telling me to stifle what my body does naturally and God-givenly. Our bodies are created with divine intelligence to be stimulated by particular stimuli, right? And of course, we want it to be in consensual, ethical, pleasurable, healthy encounters. But the thing is, if I see Trevante Rhodes, right, and if my loins start to tingle, I'm like, oh my goodness, something is wrong with me. No, something is very right with me, right? And if I can, as a spiritual leader, get you in conflict with that natural divine urge, you're going to be so busy being at war with yourself that you won't have time to smash the patriarchy. You won't have energy to confront sexism.
Oh my goodness.
You won't, right? Because you're tiring yourself out.
Yeah. You're
yourself.
Constantly at war. Yeah. And for no reason. You don't have to be.
And you don't have to be. Self-hatred fuels your oppression. Like, you're doing the oppressor's work for you when you hate yourself.
Wow.
Woo! That was definitely a gut punch. You are doing the oppressor's work when you hate yourself. Yikes! I want to circle back to that topic, but what stood out to me on this clip was her talk about divine sensual intelligence. This is a concept that I have never heard before in this particular context. Yes, absolutely have heard about intuition, absolutely have talked about intuition in previous episodes on the podcast, but to pair my intelligence in a sense of like my higher self and ascension with my sensuality, that's something that I haven't thought about. And yes, in this case, she was talking more of in a material sense and like more of a biological sense of, you know, when you are aroused by stimuli, she says, you know, usually there is a stimulus, there is an effect that happens to you to particular stimuli that stimulates you. Ooh, that's a lot of stimmies. But for me, I kind of took that a step further to think about what are the ways in which this divine sensual intelligence manifests within my divine femininity through a more elevated context. And I think that kind of shows up in a way of giving me an understanding of who I am attracted to. For me specifically, I can't speak for everybody. Attraction has never been purely physical for me. Never. I am not someone who looks at a man. I think I talked about this with Asia. I'll see a handsome man on the street and he's just that, a handsome man. It doesn't necessarily mean that I want to jump his bones. In order for me to feel connected to someone, it takes a bit of what we talked about, demisexuality, which I also believe is just like more of an intuitive knowing that like there is an intertwining between souls. There's some kind of soul connection, past life connection, what have you. And so I have adopted from this clip an understanding of needing to really hone and get in tune with my divine sensual intelligence. Because our bodies are wholly intuitive, right? I can't just have intuition surrounding what I should eat for breakfast, or what I should do in terms of like what direction I want to take my life in. Do I want to do entrepreneurship? Do I want to work corporate? Do I want to do nonprofit? Like we make all of this, we have all of this space in our lives for intuition to show up in those ways, but never have I heard or have I practiced within myself intuition showing up in the way that I connect with a human being. And sometimes, which is often true for intuition in other contexts, it doesn't make material sense. A lot of times it doesn't make material sense. And I'm getting to the point slowly but surely. I'm veering off, but I'm going to come back to Lyvonne in a minute. I'm getting to the point where I'm understanding that sometimes my intuition is calling me, my divine sensual intuition, my divine sensual intelligence is calling me towards a particular individual, not necessarily because like they are the absolute best option for me, but because there is some lesson that I need to learn from that connection. There's something that I have to gain from that, and I have to be willing to trust that at times. Okay, so let me double back. We're talking about oppression of the body occurring through self-hatred. That I really had to chew on because, again, like the way in which our sensuality as women, as divinely feminine women, in this American context that I am speaking from, is so constricted. It's a form of oppression, and I never thought about it like that, right? Like I understand that there is inequality between men and women in this country, and yes, I have very feminist values of equaling, you know, the scorecard when it comes to gender politics. However, to think of oppression, especially as a minority, that's not something that I've really applied to my sensuality. That's not something that I've applied to my femininity. It's more so something that I apply to my racial identity and the way that that shows up in, you know, the system of government that I live under. So, and dare I say, the global state of the world. But yes, I really need to chew on that to understand that the oppression that we have manifests in a way that is automatic, right? It's not even down to a person treating us in a way that is direct. It's something that is instilled within us. It's something that is socialized within us to reject our sensuality as a form of oppressing our humanity.
So
Wow.
the moment that made me really think through what I'm doing, I was a student at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I was dating a gentleman. He's in the book. His name is Art. We had been together for about 6 months, and I was in a theology and human sexuality class, which didn't have any womanists on the syllabus, by the way.
Of course
I was
it
like,
didn't.
how do you have a human
We know how that
sexuality
works.
class without any womanists? But anywho, the point is that I started to think, I really love this man. I can see myself with him for life. We hadn't been sexually active up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I was feeling like shame around wanting to be intimate with this person who was so dear to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started to consider, do I really need to wait until we're married to have sex? That's when I started, like, that desire to say, this doesn't feel bad. This doesn't feel evil. Like, this is the healthiest relationship I've ever been in. So that had me start to say, well, what do I believe and what feels good and what's my ethic for my life? And that was when I was like, okay, we out.
So we've come full circle, right? Lyvonne is talking about the ethics of agency here. She's talking about the power of resonance. She's talking about the liberation that comes from making decisions that are in tune with our bodies and that intelligence, again, that we have over our divine sensuality. What I really gained from this last clip that I'll share for this episode was this idea of transference, right? As if under the patriarchy, there is this transference of power that comes from removing agency from women as the lesser class. And there's this residue that happens because of that transfer of power from women who are innately powerful, innately divine, right? There's residue that results in our bodies, in the entrapment of our female body, that serves men, right? It serves this curated identity of women as needing to be chosen, needing to be saved, needing to serve men with our sensuality, with the entirety of our existence, I would even venture to say. Because if we are able to embody our true sensuality and take back control, take back that agency that comes with that knowing, it's a direct threat to the patriarchy, right? If we're agents of our own bodies, we're not in servitude to anyone but ourselves. And that will completely unravel and crumble an ideology that requires our subordination to sustain itself. There cannot be a patriarchy, there cannot be domination if there's no one willing to be domineered. So that sat with me through that last clip. It reminds me of, I don't remember, I think it was an Italian historical civilization that I heard about this whole idea of what is the third estate. I could have completely butchered that. History was my worst subject in school. Worst subjects. I don't know where that came from. I could be wrong. But the idea of what is the third estate is this idea that like there can't be an upper class if there's no lower class, because someone has to do the dirty work, right? Someone has to be the one to create this environment of pleasure and of luxury, if you will, of privilege for the upper class. And in the same way, I feel like women are the third estate in the sense that our sensuality, specifically in this context, is used as a tool to exert domination so that men can benefit from our humanity, so that they have the ultimate privilege over our humanity, and that we are denied the ability to enjoy that for ourselves. And so there's a part of this interview that I did not include in this podcast, but I do think is worthy of mention, where she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I would advocate for you to get the book so that she can go more into depth on what that means, because this is only about a 30 to 35 minute podcast. However, she talks about this syndrome and how disembodiment is part of the ways in which, as Black people, we have self-learned survival. Like, it was used as a means of survival through our very traumatic past in this country. So with us having that kind of like in our genetic, energetic pool, today we have to remind ourselves that we don't need to disembody to survive, right? Because the oppression was so thick. And as I've learned, the oppression has not stopped when it comes to feminine sensuality. It just looked different. We had so much oppression in the past that our disembodiment was the only way that we were able to tolerate our humanity. And so now we're in a space of greater freedom. I wouldn't say complete freedom, but greater freedom, where our agency can become our safety. My decision to be fully embodied in my sensuality is safe for me. It is human. It is natural. It is my birthright. It is all of those things. And so this last clip, I think, did a really, really fantastic job of outlining the importance of that. I hope that you enjoyed this different style of an episode this week. I may play around with more video in the future. Perhaps, I don't know, I might put on a little bit of eye color for you. You know, you might get a little lip, just depending on how I feel. It's about 11:30 at night on a work night, so you're just getting this head wrap in these earrings, girl, today, and my cute headboard. That's all you're gonna get from me today. But maybe on a future episode, video episode, I'll zhuzh it up for you. I'll jazz it up for you just a bit. So let's get into our next and last segment, which will be the discussion question of the week. So the discussion question of the week actually comes from Lyvonne Briggs' book, Sensual Faith, page 19, end of chapter 1. She asks a very pertinent question that I am answering for myself. In what ways do you want to heal your relationship to your body? I hope that provides an insightful journaling session for you. I'll catch you next episode.